This is video 13 and we're talking about function notation. So to start off with this, I've written five different equations, and I want you to look at that one equation. Okay, look at that one, the one I'm thinking of. Some of you might say, well, what is she talking about? What equation? There's five different ones, which one? Okay, well, if I just say, hey, the one that says y equals, you have no idea which equation I'm talking about, okay? There's five different ones that say y equals, okay? So with function notation, we give each function names, okay? Kind of like in class. If your teacher just says, hey, come over here, a few of you might think she's talking to you. But if your teacher says, hey, John, come over here, oh, then you know exactly who she wants, okay? So function notation is just a way of naming, okay? It's just giving everybody names so that when we talk about these functions, we know which equation we're talking about, okay? So we don't just have to be so vague, all right? And all it is instead of saying y equals, we write f of x, okay? It looks like f parentheses x parentheses. We say it f of x, okay? Make sure you know how to pronounce it correctly. And again, it's just naming. So before, we might have something that looks like y equals 3x plus 4. Well, we're going to name this function, maybe I want to name it f. So I'm going to say f of x, because x is that variable, and so it'd be 3x plus 4. Okay, maybe I have a function, maybe I want to rename that function. We could call it something else. Okay, maybe I want to call it g. I should say g of x. Maybe I have another equation, y equals, let's say 7t minus 6. So before it looked like y equals, naming it, maybe I want to call this function g. So I'm going to say g of t, because t is my variable, and then I just write the equation just as it is. Okay, so now when I say, hey, look at that function, instead of saying which one, if I say, hey, look at that function f, you know exactly which function I'm talking about. If I say, look at function g of t, you know I'm talking about the second equation, okay? So when we solve these, or when we actually evaluate, we've got two different steps, okay? We're going to do a handful of examples to kind of make sense of this. But we substitute the given number for x, and we just plug it in, okay? Make sure you use parentheses. If you don't, you might get a little mix-ups, okay? And then we just simplify. All right, so let's start off. Here's our function, and we want to evaluate function number 1 at when x is 4. Okay, so all we have to do is simplify. So I'm going to plug in anywhere I see an x, I'm going to say a 4. So f of 4 equals 7 minus 3 times 4. Okay, when I evaluate that, f of 4 equals negative 5. Okay, now the second one, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to find when x is 2. This way of writing it is just a fancy way of saying when x is 2. Okay, so I'm going to say g of 2 equals 10 squared plus 3. So this g of 2 equals 100 plus 3, which would be 103. Okay, so we kind of took a different approach to evaluating functions. Just now we know which function we're talking about. So this next one, f of t. So I want to find when f equals negative 3. And especially when we have exponents, this is when those parentheses are very important. So f of negative 3, when you type this into your calculator, make sure you put those parentheses. of negative 3 is negative 4. Okay, so that's how we find, that's how we evaluate these functions whenever we are given numbers and equations. Okay, now sometimes we might be given a graph and it says, well, evaluate this function. And it's kind of like, what are we doing? So here we've got function f and we've got this graph. So it's kind of like we have the x values and all we need to do is find the y values. So this says f of 1. This means, remember, when, I'll write this out, when x equals 1, we're trying to find what is our y value. Okay, so when x is 1, that's right here, and my y value would be up 2. So my y value is 2. At negative 1, here's my x value, my y value is right here at 0. At negative 3, my y value is down 2. Okay, hopefully you're getting kind of the hang of this. At 2, so I'm going to go over 2, my y value is 2. Okay, at 5, 3, 4, 5, my y value is all the way up here at 3. And at 6, my y value up here is at 4. Okay, so when evaluating from a picture, it's like we have our x value and we're trying to find our y value. All right, so this is function notation, which again is just naming functions.